simple echo server example. This is for my folks in class IT-129, Python scripting at Marymount University. Okay, so first off, it's a multi-threaded client-server application. You're going to need 2 terminal windows. However, first, you want to make sure you download the latest updated code, because I fixed a problem for the Windows folks, and there was a misspelling in one of the string, so I fixed that too. So open up a terminal. This is for the Mac OS. I'll do Mac OS and then I'll do Windows. So open up a terminal window, and I'm going to make this bigger so we can see it. There's a little bit of a lag when I'm working on a VM. So anyway, that should be a little bit bigger, big enough right there. So I don't know where you stored your the copy of the repository, but I'm assuming the dev folder, dev/IT-129. Now, if you already have the repository on your local machine, all you have to do is do a git pull to update it. And you can see that I've made a few changes here to some of the objects. Okay, so anyway, change then. I'm going to clear the screen. Change to the change to the simple echo server directory. And then you're going to run the server first, right? If you don't run the server, then things aren't going to work right. The server must be running in order to accept incoming client connections, right? So for Mac OS, it's Python 3, and then source. That's because there's a source directory, and then server, and then run the main.py. And you should see this. Listening on IP address 127.0.0.1, port 5500, waiting for incoming client connection. So this is blocking I/O, right? That server is listening, waiting for an incoming connection. I'm going to turn this way. All right. And then do another. Okay. So now I'm going to create another shell, right? You're going to have to do the same thing to run your clients. Now, you can run more than one client, like I said. So let me make this bigger. Okay. Again, change to the simple, so cd, simple echo server directory, cd dev /IT-129. I'm sorry, IT, not 1T. IT-129. And then simple echo server. Okay, let me string this out a little bit more. There we go. Now, when you're there, you want to do Python 3 source/client, this time main. And then you'll see in the background, right, it accepted the client connection from IP address 127.0.0.1. And this is the ephemeral port. That number will be different on your computer, more than likely. That's the ephemeral port that says, hey, this is the actual port that this client, that's how this server connects, right, with this particular terminal window on this ephemeral port. Okay, now you can enter a message. Hello world. And you can see it echoed on the server side, and then the server just takes that message and sends it right back to the client. So now you can create another terminal window, launch another terminal window, and start up another client. So let's do that. So let me make this bigger so you can see it. And that should be fine right there. All right, so change directory, dev /IT-129, simple. Okay, and then Python 3 source/client, and then main. All right, now you see, it accepted, right, the second one on a different ephemeral port, and you can send messages to it. So I'll say client 2, and I'll send the message client 1 here. Okay, now if you want to quit a client, so there we have 2 connected clients to the same server. This is a multi-threaded server, and so you can as many clients as memory and resources will allow. Okay, so if you want to just quit the client, just type quit, and the client will shut down. If you want to shut down the client and the server, type shutdown server, and that'll sever the connection and shut down the server as well. You don't obviously want to do that, right? If you're running multiple clients, but you can just to see what happens. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to run this on Windows. Okay. Okay, for Windows users, same kind of a process. You need to use 2 different terminals, right? Well, or at least one terminal for the server. So I'm going to use git bash, launch git bash, and change to the IT-129 repository. Now, before you go to the simple echo server, make sure that you do a git pull to update to the latest code, right? And I've already done this. So then change to the simple echo server, and then start the server. So it is Python for Windows, Python source/server main.py. So you should see the message waiting for incoming client connection. Now once you got the server started, launch another terminal to to launch a client, right? To crank up a client. So we're going to change to cd dev/IT-129 simple echo server, and then Python source/client this time main. Hit return, and you see that we've connected. Okay, now we can send a message. So what you see on the server side is this client connects, right? So first off, you launch the server, and it says waiting for, it says listening on address 127.0.0.1, port 5500, waiting for incoming client connection. And then when the client connects, it says accepted client connection from IP address 127.0.0.1 and the port. This is the ephemeral port that this that's keeping track of that this client is connected to that server. Okay, because you can crank up another one. So let's crank up another client, and so cd dev/IT-129 simple echo server. Okay, so then Python, Python Python source/client again main.py, and then I'll just say client 2, and we see client 2. That message gets echoed back out to the client, and then here I'm going to say client 1. Now before I hit return, I'll make that window so you can see what happens when I hit client 1, hit return, and you see that message client 1 got echoed back. Now to quit a client, I'll quit the second one, so quit, doesn't matter. It'll shut down the client, okay? And then to shut down the client and the server, just type shutdown server, and that'll shut down the client and the server. Okay, now let's take a look at the code. So I had to fix a problem. If you try to run this without updating to the latest repository copy, then you're going to get it. You'll see an error, and I'll show you the code that was the culprit and how I fixed it. So I'm launching Visual Studio Code for the simple Echo server project. Okay, so let me shut this down just to make sure. So we're in the simple Echo server, and we're going to open up the server.py. Okay, so I imported OS, right? That's one of the changes I made. And then the offending line of code was right here. Because the error that you'll get if you're running the older or the original version, I'm trying to use this attribute on the socket class, okay, or the socket object, so underscore reuse port. That's a constant declared on that socket class, and it's not defined in Windows, right? So this throws an error when you first try to launch the server, right? And that can be really frustrating. Like I evidently I did not test this for Windows, right, before I released it. Well, the fix is don't use that. Don't try to call that attribute, right? So I called this attribute instead. Sorry, called this attribute so reuse address, which is defined in Windows. Have to figure out like why reuse port is not defined. It's either not required, right? But this line of code works fine, and I got to figure out, why this is not defined, right, to give you guys a solid answer. But anyway, to check which one of these lines to execute, I use the OS library. It has a name on that class. And if you're running in Windows, the name of the OS is NT, right? And if you're not running in Windows, then it's going to be either Linux or Mac OS I'd say 99% of the time. And that'll be POSIX, right? But I'm just checking for NT. And if it's running in Windows, then, and I think this includes Windows 7 and Windows 10, then this line of code executes. If it's Mac OS or Linux, this line of code executes. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you run this in Windows, for certain, you're downloading the latest version, and then of course on Mac OS and Linux as well, right? So that's basically it. When the client connects, right? Well, first off, when you crank open on the server, it prints this message listening on IP address, whatever the IP is and whatever the port is, right? That is set in the constructor, right? If you look up here for the def, for the init method, this is the constructor for the class, right? Server class. It takes two arguments, IP and port. Okay, so if you go to the main, this is where we actually crank everything up, right? This is the file that runs. We're setting IP address to 127.0.0.1 and 5500. Okay, so in the next class, I'll show you how you can actually dynamically set those values, right? Or set them to something a little bit more meaningful. Okay, that's about it. Hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me. Have a great day.